Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass Education Series, Fired Up. We are so excited to have a really unique and exceptional artist with us here today. Her name is Angela Babby, and she does really incredible mosaic work, but it's actually kind of a combination of a lot of different techniques, as you'll see. She's pulling from her knowledge in stained glass, she's using enameling, and she's using mosaic to create pieces that on a small computer screen might look like paintings, but are actually very evocative and have a lot of emotion because of the fact that they are three-dimensional works. And you'll be able to see more of that as we go through. She pulls from her Lakota ancestry and makes really just touching and provocative works that I'm excited to share with you. So Angela, if you'd like to go ahead and start the PowerPoint, you can take it away. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. As she said, I am a Lakota artist, and I was one of many Native Americans that were displaced from their tribe. And through my art, I've kind of gotten back to my tribe and have started to learn all about the history and religion of my tribe. So that all began in 2002 when I started doing Native art shows. And so I'm going to start off my presentation with a video that was taken in January of this year at the Herd Indian Market in Phoenix, Arizona. And it really kind of introduces me to you. So here we go. Taking a long time. For some reason. Hi, my name's Angela Babby. I'm enrolled at Pine Ridge in South Dakota. I live in Billings, Montana, and I work in glass mosaics, and I'm starting to do fused glass as well. I actually got first place for my new landscapes that I'm starting to do. First place on that for paintings, and then this one is got second place for the new category that's sculpture, but it's glass. Most of my work is inspired by black and white photographs. I have a tendency to use Gertrude Casabier's photographs, black and whites. She just had all of this emotion in her photography. She worked about the same time as Edward Curtis, and I just think she's so much better than Curtis. And her images have inspired many of my works over the years. You know, the artists in general, they're just now discovering Gertrude Casabier, even though she was working at the same time as Curtis. And women don't get as much attention in the art world. And you know, there's just nothing you can do about it. But I like to make statements about it. Okay, what I do is I'll make a sketch. It's very similar to traditional stained glass, but I replace the foiling method of making a see-through, stained glass piece with you cut out the pieces and then you end up gluing them down onto tile board. So they're more tiles than they are windows, if that makes it more clear. So they're glued down and then they're mortared, which kind of makes them look like a painting, but they're waterproof and very strong. And this is my little dog who has escaped. There he is, Cooler.
There you go.
When I studied art in college, I mainly was a watercolorist because I didn't like oil, the smell of oil, it really bothered me. So I learned how to watercolor. Then I had a decorative painting business for a decade. And I got burned out and I took a pottery class to kind of unwind. I only was able to go to like 3 of them. But while I was there, this other student in there said, "Oh, you should do the Herd Indian Market. Oh, but you have to be enrolled to do that." I had never been to a native market. The first time I came to one, I was in it, and it's just escalated from there. Getting rained on here at the Herd is mainly why I switched over to glass. I'll tell you, I had a really hard time with this. I mean, my mom died a couple years ago, and it coincided with the COVID thing, so I've been kind of depressed for the past couple of years.
I've heard it from a lot
But
of people.
now, just coming out, I've never enjoyed doing this show so much. Happiness.
Happiness, right? And you have your puppy.
He's happy too.
Yeah.
So on to what I was doing prior to the native markets was the decorative painting business that I had. So this was one of my projects. I did a whole bunch of McMansions in Scottsdale all by myself. And this window was one of the glass pieces that I ended up making, and it's kind of through that doorway of this bedroom. So I did do a little bit of glass, but this was my first mosaic artwork that I made, and it was literally on Masonite because I hadn't thought really through, how to best make them at that time. But I hauled this one around to the native art shows, and a lot of the people that were at the market would jump back and they hated this piece and they'd say, "Oh, it's Native American Frankenstein." And it ended up getting bought by the 5 years later, after I made it, by the Lakota Museum in South Dakota. So, and then my dad was also finishing up this whole book that he put in the Library of Congress. He wrote it with my cousin, and it was all about our genealogy because and so I started using a lot of the photographs. This was a picture of my aunt. So I put a little pin on her, and it's a woodpecker. That was her name, Woodpecker. And then the woodpecker's flying with a little ant in its mouth in my artwork there. So this is the Holy Rosary Mission and the Red Cloud School out on Pine Ridge on the left-hand side here. It's kind of an aerial view. So Chief Red Cloud and many of my relatives are buried in the graveyard in the upper right-hand corner there. And this artwork was commissioned by the high school, and that's on the far left-hand side of the picture of the school. So one of my great aunts was literally in the building when they were bringing in the people from the massacre that happened at I'm spacing out names right now. Anyway, this is Chief Red Cloud, and he and I share a grandfather way back. So this is when I revisited that first image of Medicine Bottle, which was that first mosaic. I wanted to see what would happen if I was able to actually paint the faces. So this is the 2 that I made for a gallery exhibit that was about the 38+2, the largest mass hanging execution in American history. I'm really getting nervous. Sorry. Anyway, the people who were doing the exhibit chose the orange one. the other one went on and won Best of Painting at the Santa Fe Indian Art Market. So here we'll go ahead and look at my process. So this piece here is called Exterminate All of the Brutes. And the image on the left is really with one firing. This is what I ended up with. And usually I don't look at these too long, because you kind of lose faith that they're gonna work out, because there's none of the detail there yet. So first off, I make a sketch and figure out kind of what I'm gonna do overall, and then you transfer that sketch onto cardboard, and then you cut out each of the little pieces. And then from there, you cut and grind each one of them, and decide what you're gonna do to make the overall design work. And then after you've enameled them, you put them in the kiln and fire them to over 1,000 degrees to make a glass on glass piece. And then the final step is mortaring them. So you glue it all down, and then the mortar is what either pulls it together or pushes it apart. So that's a whole nother part. So there's 3 different distinct phases to it. So only after the last step do you really see what you've got for the first time. So that is the finished piece. So this is going to be just a little tour of my studio. So here we are going into my studio, and in my little studio, it's not very big. And up here on the wall, you will see the pattern that was made for the piece that I just showed you. And generally speaking, I number all the pieces. On this one, I didn't do quite all of them. But as you'll see, usually you'll see someone's studio and it's all neat and tidy. This has been all cleaned up. This is a really messy medium, and it's harder and harder to keep it organized because you keep getting more and more small pieces. So just kind of show you around first. You see lots of glass, some fusible materials as well, the frit and whatnot. So here we have some of the pieces that I'm working on right now. This is just a single piece of glass that has been enameled. It's not quite done yet. It's got to be re-fired. It's had 1 firing so far. And this is, of course, a cut piece. It's all cut. It's got a little bit of the enameling started on there, but it's going to fire to a different color. But that's all cut. This one also is cut. And then after I had the face all cut, I noticed there was a flaw in it, so I had to recut that. Many times you'll have to recut things because they're just not working. So I'll study this piece and I'll decide what I'm going to do with this. I can enamel into it and shade it and make it textured or add another color, anything that I can think of. And then we'll come down here. This piece is one of my only fused glass pieces. So it's a fused glass piece. It's a platter, and it never felt done to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and make another platter to put behind it to make it stand out. Because it's made out of transparent glass, iridized glass, and I want it to be, you know, as good as it can be, and I really feel like it needs to be backed up with white. So and I finally have a kiln that's big enough to where I can make that second platter piece. So then we have all kinds of different colors and all different kinds of glass. I like to have it out so I can kind of go through it and then put it all out and study it together. So there we've got, I'm going to start doing some experimentation with the frit, which is melted into fusible glasses, and that'll be a whole nother thing. So there's that, and then this is one of my favorite glasses. I'm getting ready to cut that. It's iridescent, clear ripple. And then here we have a bunch of different experiments. So when I'm getting ready to start a piece, if I need to figure out whether I've made the right color, I'll have to mix it up and then paint it onto a piece of glass and fire it to see what color it's going to be, because you don't really know exactly what you've got until it's fired in. And then this piece here is just a little mock-up of some of the different frits, the little pieces of glass melted together to see what colors they look like and what they do when they melt into the glass. So you'll see a color reaction around that turquoise that I think is really fun and interesting. So the enamels that I've mixed up here, they come in a powdered form. So it's just a powder, and then you mix it with a medium, which we'll see, let's see. Oh, I don't see it here. But anyway, it's a medium that you mix with it, and then it turns into kind of a paint, and you could thin that with water. And that's really experimentation where you figure out, you know, what happens when you thin out the paint. So these are some stained glass works that I mocked up for a project that I didn't end up getting, but I really like these, but they're super labor intensive because they're two-sided, because I never liked the idea that the other side didn't have anything on it. Oops, couldn't quite do that, hold on. So there you see that side, and then you have the other side as well, and it's see-through. So that's stained glass as opposed to mosaic, which I love mosaic. This is attempting to mock up an iron large frame for a huge window, because I really don't like the straight lines coming across stained glass if I was going to do a really large window. But yeah, these are enameled on both sides, so they look the same looking in and out. Here's my little grinding station with the diamond bandsaw, and the grinder. Very simple tools. Mostly, pretty much everything I do is hand cut, and then just ground with the little grinder. And so this is what I'm doing for a friend. So this is the pattern that I mock up that I want, and it's from one of his photographs that his daughter loves. His name's John Gozencenter. And so I'm gonna design this so that it is really modern. I haven't decided on all the colors, but I've got the sky kind of cut up here. So each piece has to be cut out, and then you lay this onto a piece of glass. I'm showing you the whole darn thing, even though you probably could tell. So you lay that onto the glass and then you cut it out. You draw that on there and then you cut it out, and then you grind it, and you do all those different pieces that way. And then if you're enameling, you take a piece and you paint it with enamels. So this is all the little pieces cut out, obviously. And then after it's fired, you can get like the, you can figure out what the exact colors are, but then it might not be finished. So you might have to go back in and do what you think you need to do to it and refire it. A lot of times I'll have to do 3 different firings, 4 different firings if it's really being a bugger. And you just have to keep working it till it works, because it decides when it's done. So this is the scene of the crime, and it's not too exciting, but people seem to want to see it, and that's it. So thanks for stopping in, and thank you for your interest. So here is that piece in progress. Just continuing to, and this is the finished piece. My first horse came out really good, and I'm very happy with it. This is the white platter that I made for this piece, but unfortunately I was rushing and I did something terrible and it ended up breaking. And so again, you learn by making mistakes. So this is my new big kiln, which hopefully will speed me up. Here we have the 2 in a series. I'm going to do more of these because each time you do them, you learn something about the interactions that happen. So we have Zeke Shah. She was this wonderful woman who was a suffragette, and she wrote one of the first Native American operas, and yeah, I just love her. And then I named the second one Exterminate All the Brutes after an HBO series that's a masterpiece that I think everyone should watch in 4 hours. You can learn everything about the history of genocide on the earth. It's just the most amazing thing. So this is a piece that I made for these series of educational exhibits that I've been a part of. And it illustrates the first written story of white buffalo calf woman. And it's currently on exhibit in Rapid City at the Doll Museum. Okay. This is my latest mosaic without any enameling on it. It's a landscape, obviously. So it's really messing around with what would happen when you combine all of these different kinds of really interesting glasses, studying the relationships between the different colors and patterns and seeing how they work. So each artwork that I make, it's kind of a test that goes into my library that kind of shows me what color interactions do. So this particular piece was inspired by this little miniature up here. And what you'll notice is I changed the overall glasses so that the shadows were purple in this larger one. So you can notice what kind of overall interactions you get. And you just don't really know what it's going to look like till you complete it. So that's kind of one of the difficulties with this medium, is that you have to finish something to really study what's going to go on. So this first one, this miniature, I was really happy with. It used a sparkle green for the shadows. So then the larger experiment was all about the purple. So the river in there is made out of iridescent favorial glass. So when you walk around the piece, it does all kinds of shiny things. So it's not just a static piece like you see in the photographs of them. So that piece was called Anchimaka, Grandmother Earth. And yeah, so that's that one. This is Kichiapi 1890, which is translated to Remember, Don't Forget. I am completely spacing out. Oh, I can't do that one. Sorry. Okay, so this little guy saved me. I couldn't work for an entire year because I was trying to get a really good project. And so I started doing this series, and it was one of my first series. I did 16 different renditions of this little guy. And this is Melt Prayers for the People and the Planet. And this really brought together all my favorite glasses. And it was inspired by a book that this client of mine gave me. And this picture was on the back of it. And I just fell in love with her. She's a little Inuit girl. And these two I made for my friend John Gozen Center. And the one on the right ended up getting on the cover of Native American Art magazine. And it's the first time glass has been on the cover of that magazine. This again was part of an educational exhibit of Lakota stories. This was the origin story of the Lakota people who came out of Wind Cave. And this is Love Trumps Hate. A photographer went out to Pine Ridge and was taking black and white photographs. So I fell in love with this picture and called him up and asked him if I could use his image. And so I made it into a mosaic. This is Turtle Island War Party, it was for a gallery show about the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And all of those women on the bottom were elected to office, and they're just amazing. So this is a close-up of, what happens when the mortar, you have different colors of mortar to either pull it together or push it apart or make a design. And this was a very early work inspired by a picture of my great grandmother's sister. So she probably looked a lot like her. And somebody saw this image online and said, that's my grandmother. So that was pretty cool. This is just one of my favorite small works, Little Bear. And this was one of the only portraits I ever did and got to work on the first firing. He's a friend of mine. And I opened up the kiln and he was in there in the first firing. It was really great. So not all art is positive, and this was one of the more negative pieces I've ever made, but it ended up getting in this really neat show at a college, I believe in Arkansas. And so that's on exhibit there. So that is pretty much my presentation. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Angela. Your process is so fascinating, as is the content and your background. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the Clearly Indigenous exhibit, because that was really the first group showing of a Native American glass exhibit. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It was such an honor to be in that show. I got to meet many of my idols. And yeah, so that now is, I think it's traveling. Oh, I have it. Let's see. Yeah, I might, oops. Yeah, so that exhibit really brings together all these different kinds of artists, the blowers, and just being in that exhibit. I don't know, for the longest time, probably at least 15 years, people couldn't understand that my work was made out of glass. They just couldn't understand it. And so having my work in that show really, it makes it very clear that it's glass. So and that show is going to keep traveling for at least 5 years, I think. So that's
Yeah, I
really
think it's
exciting.
going to Kansas in June. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. And so the other exhibits that you've been, would you say are involving different mediums, and that's sort of how you started, and this is now sort of your entry into more glass specific exhibitions?
I pretty much have only done solo shows with like with my glass. But the educational exhibits are all different mediums and Lakota artists all together telling very specific stories. I don't know if I answered that question. Sorry.
No, that's good. We do have a couple questions regarding your process, just simple ones. Someone that wanted to know, what brand enamels do you use?
Oh man, I am really having a problem with names today. Ooh, Thompson enamels. Yeah, I started with that, and that, I've never had any problem with it. I did try the high fire ones, the you have to take up to a really high temperature, and those I really didn't like, but the low fire Thompson enamels are just fantastic. I love them.
Okay. And someone also trying to, I think, understand a little bit more detail on that firing process. Their question is, let's see, says, so you can enamel and fire stained glass. It doesn't have to be fusible glass. I think I think maybe if you go through the steps again, they'll understand a little bit better what you refer to when
Okay.
we use those terms.
Yeah, so the enamel only is taken to 1150. So it's not, it's fired, but it's not a high fire process that transforms the glass, So all it does is melt the enamel into the glass. So then it becomes glass on glass. Now, if you're fusing, then you're literally taking a piece of glass, not little ground up glass, which is what enamel is. But if you're fusing, then you're taking a literal chunk of glass and melting it into another piece of glass. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
I know when we spoke, there was a big project that you were working on that was really taking your time and focus right now. Are you able to tell us a little bit about what that is?
Sure. It's 7 foot by about, let's see, 7 foot by, I think, 10 foot. And it's the donor wall at this new Oglala, Lakota art space. And so it's going to be a kind of it's inspired by Gustav Klimt's mosaic that was in this mansion over in Austria, and it's the tree of life. And so I'm working on that, and it's highly detailed and extremely difficult, but I'm really excited to see how it turns out. So
That is exciting. Roni was in Montana in July and August, they said, and they saw an exhibit there and were wondering if it was clearly indigenous, but I don't think it has traveled there, has it?
not in Montana, but I had a show at the Brinton that just came down in October. So yeah, that's right outside of Sheridan, Wyoming.
Okay.
It could have been that. I'm not sure.
Okay. And Howard has a question, Howard, which I don't completely understand. So why don't you unmute yourself and ask her yourself?
Oh, there's so many. Plus, we've had a chance to talk a bunch, and I absolutely love your art.
Thank you.
Oh, when you were discussing, I've got a couple, if you don't mind, Demetra. When you were discussing fusing versus enameling, do
Right.
you use a different type of glass in those two processes to start with?
Yes. Yeah, they're the thing about enamel is that my experience is that you can enamel pretty much any kind of glass. It doesn't seem to have compatibility issues. At least I haven't ever had a problem with it. But when you start to get into using frit of any kind, which is a different process, it's just it gets melted in, and you have to take it up to, I think, like 1400 degrees, so that you're literally melting the pieces of glass together. And that comes in powdered form too, but it's different than enamels. So yeah, if you are using frits, then you have to start worrying about every piece of glass that you are trying to put together has to be the same expansion. So you can only use bullseye, or you can only use other, most of the glasses now are testing for compatibility so that you can melt them together. So there's different ones, but if you're doing that, you have to make sure that all the glass you're using is the same kind, same expansion. Does that make sense?
Yes, it absolutely does. And one other question. I was really intrigued by the poor platter that broke. The
Oh,
one
yes.
that had the different decorations on it. And I was curious, what was the decoration? I mean, what was that pattern that you put into the platter?
You mean the white one?
Yeah, it was kind of green. It looked a little bit like an octopus to me, if that
Oh
makes.
yeah, yeah. The platter itself was an octopus, and I made that years and years ago when I was working at Bullseye, and they fired that for me. I laid it all up, and then they fired it, and I never had a kiln big enough to ever do anything like that.
Oh,
So yeah, so now I do. But yeah, the white one that I made did fail because I was rushing, and I ended up thinking the backside was boring, and so I put some glass on the bottom of it, and it didn't like it. So yeah.
so maybe some octopus lover will contact you again, or aquarium.
Yeah, I love octopuses.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
In terms of the slides that we saw today, what would you say, which work do you feel the strongest emotional connection to? And can you tell us a little bit about why?
I really love the melt piece, which is the little Inuit girl.
Yeah.
But most of my pieces, I make them because I love them. So I really, really, but the melt piece I love because I really put together all of my favorite kinds of glass, and there's not that much enameling on it. So it's more about the glass than many of my other works. And it's really abstract. And I think my work's gonna end up going more and more in that direction of letting the glass really speak for itself.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does anyone have any other questions? Howard, you said you had a couple, so if you have one more, that's okay.
All right, thanks. So I've got my usual three. could you tell us a little bit more about Grandmother Earth, which I thought was really, really also fascinating. It looked like it was, a very big piece, and where that found a home, please.
I actually, I made that. I wanted to make a landscape, and my sister wanted to buy a landscape for her house, and so we decided on the size. She said, "Keep it really simple," and it didn't stay simple. It just, once you start doing something, it tells you what it wants to be, and so it just kept getting more and more complicated. But I was really pleased with how it came out. So she ended up loving that, and especially since it ended up winning that prize and everything. But it was also quite a star at that museum show that I just had to. People really love that, and I do love doing those because they're much more, they're much easier. Enameling faces and doing those kinds of things is pretty difficult, and so that's kind of just a fun thing for me to do. So
And I'll ask the question if no one else does. If
No.
people are interested, Angela, in finding more information, contacting you or wanting to buy either your painting or glasswork somewhere, could you tell us
yes,
what to
all
do?
my information is on my website, which is angelababby.com. And yeah, so I'm pretty easy to get in touch with if you want to.
We have a comment from someone. It says, I saw the Wounded Knee piece in Takua and Chamberlain, South Dakota. It made me cry the first time I saw it. I was drawn in by the glass and colors, but then realized it was a group of murdered women. And
Yes.
that's a good point, is that some of your pieces do tackle difficult subject matter, but you're able to use the intricacy and the beauty of the glass to draw people in, to open them up to share that story. And that's so very important.
That was the exact intention. And that piece in particular, all of the artists that took part in that exhibit of Wounded Knee, it was a really hard thing to do. I was kind of amazed. I just kept putting it off. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and I ended up being late, to get it to the exhibit because I didn't want to do it. And then now I really love that piece. I actually have a print of it hanging on my dining room wall. It's just it's aesthetically very pleasing, but it's kind of a mean piece.
Thank you for sharing that. We have one more question. Someone wanting to know, what grout tints do you like? Do you focus on certain colors or match the glass in each section?
That is a really interesting question, because over time, one of my early pieces I got back to many years later and saw what I was doing with mortar early on, and I ended up remortaring it, and it completely changed it. So it's really hard to say any kind of a rule. You kind of have to, at first I'd mortar things, and then I'd say, oh, I'd get it all mortared and say, no, that's not working. And then you have to remove that mortar and try another color. So it's hard to say any specific rule. You just kind of have to look at it and try to figure out what it wants. It really, you're kind of enslaved to the piece until it says, oh yeah, that's what it wanted. I don't know.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point earlier too, that with glass, we never really know until it comes out of the kiln. So there's a lot more sort of trial and error that goes into the process than, say, painting or, something like that, that's more in real time.
For sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Angela. Your work just has so much emotional depth. You share really powerful and meaningful stories, and your process is just fascinating. So we appreciate you being so open with us today. It's been a pleasure to share your work. And if the attendees would like to see it again or share it with their friends, this video will be up on YouTube in the next day, probably. So you can go ahead and check it out and forward the link to your friends. All right, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. And if people want to stay on and